Something shifted behind the scenes and you are still not fully aware of the whole picture. While you were simply living your life, staying focused on your own path, someone connected to your journey was slowly exposed to the truth about you in a way they could no longer dismiss. What they saw did not just grab their attention for a moment, it started changing the way they felt inside. The way they viewed you began to shift, and even the way they saw the people around them started to look different. This is not a small thing, so stay with this. From a distance, they believed they had already understood who you were. They thought they had your personality figured out, your intentions labeled, your story already written in their mind. But as time passed and they observed more closely, that belief started to fall apart. You were not performing, you were not pretending, you were not switching versions of yourself depending on who was watching. There was a steady honesty in you, something calm but real, something that could not be copied or faked. And once that became clear to them, it created a quiet shift inside their awareness. Old assumptions started breaking down without drama, just naturally fading as reality took their place. Something in them started pulling away from what no longer felt aligned, not because of a single event, but because truth was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. At first they were not looking for anything deep or life-changing. They were simply observing small moments without realizing those moments were building a bigger picture. They noticed how you treated people when there was nothing to gain. They saw how you stayed grounded, even when situations became uncomfortable or difficult. They paid attention to how you remained consistent, even when it would have been easier to act differently or follow the crowd. None of these things were loud or dramatic, but together they created a pattern that was hard to ignore. Over time, they began to understand that your behavior was not random. It was stable. It was aligned. It was real in a way they were not used to. And that realization hit deeper than expected, because in their experience they had seen a lot of inconsistency in others, mixed signals, unclear intentions, words that did not match actions. But with you, what they saw kept repeating in the same direction. Your actions matched your words, your energy stayed steady, and your presence felt the same, whether they were close or far. Slowly, their mind stopped relying on outside opinions about you. Rumors or second-hand stories started losing power, because direct observation was stronger than anything they had heard. Keep listening, because this is where it starts to shift even more. They were no longer comparing you to stories. They were comparing stories to what they were actually witnessing, and reality kept winning every single time. That contrast created confusion in their old beliefs, and at the same time, it created clarity about you. As this awareness grew, it did not stay limited to how they saw you. It started affecting how they saw everything around them. Certain connections in their life began to feel different, almost uncomfortable, as if something previously ignored was now visible. Conversations that once felt normal started to feel empty. People they trusted started to feel less real. Without even planning it, they began questioning what was genuine and what was only surface level. And in the middle of all of this reflection, one thought kept returning again and again like a quiet echo they could not escape. This person is real. And that thought became the turning point. The more they accepted your authenticity, the more they started noticing imbalance elsewhere in their world. Not all at once, not in a dramatic way, but slowly, in quiet moments of reflection. They began asking themselves things they had avoided before. Who actually supports growth? Who drains energy? Who is honest? And who only stays when it benefits them? Stay with this because it continues. This inner questioning changed the way they moved, the way they connected, and even the way they chose silence over unnecessary noise. If you are wondering where this is going, understand this. When someone truly recognizes authenticity, it does not just change their opinion, it changes their direction. And right now, everything around them is quietly being measured against the truth they saw in you. And who is only here because it feels familiar? Who is speaking growth into me? And who is quietly keeping me stuck in the same emotional loops that no longer match my future? These were not simple questions. They carried pressure, because deep down the answers were going to shift everything. And inside, they could feel that truth already forming. What they were discovering about you was not just about you at all. It was also revealing something about themselves, about what they accept, about what they call normal, about what they tolerate when their heart is asking for more. Slowly they started seeing that some relationships in their life were not built on real alignment. They were built on routine, on comfort, on history, on the fear of starting over. It felt easier to stay than to face the ending. But ease is not the same as truth. Stay with this, because this is where most people miss the turning point. Real endings rarely begin with noise. They begin with awareness, a quiet inner moment where someone finally sees what they have been avoiding, and that is exactly where they were heading. With every new realization about you, something inside them started reorganizing itself. Old justifications began losing strength. Old excuses stopped working the way they used to. They were becoming more aware, more awake, more unwilling to pretend something was fine when it clearly was not. There was a connection in their life that had become too familiar to question. Not necessarily deep, not necessarily fulfilling, but easy, predictable, something they could return to without thinking too much. For a while they kept going through the motions, responding the same way, showing up the same way, acting like nothing was shifting. But inside something was already breaking apart quietly. Every time they thought about the realness they saw in you, it created contrast, and that contrast became impossible to ignore. What felt honest with you made everything else feel slightly off. Not dramatically wrong, but emotionally hollow. Not about perfection versus imperfection. It became about truth versus routine, about sincerity versus convenience. Keep watching closely, because this shift changes everything in ways they did not expect at first. The person they eventually stepped away from may not have understood the change in the beginning. From the outside, everything can look normal while an entire inner world is collapsing and rebuilding at the same time. But inside them, distance was growing. Conversations that once felt engaging started feeling repetitive. Emotional exchanges that once felt warm started feeling tiring. Patterns they used to ignore started becoming uncomfortable to continue. And still they were not searching for flaws. They were not trying to end anything on purpose. In fact, part of them resisted the idea of change completely, because change disrupts comfort. And letting go is never easy when something is familiar. But truth does not wait for readiness. It arrives on its own time. And once it arrives, it does not leave quietly. It stays. It pushes. It makes silence feel louder than words. So they found themselves in nights filled with thought, replaying moments, questioning patterns, and sitting with feelings they could no longer dismiss. Something in their life no longer matched the person they were becoming. That is when the real inner conflict began. They started asking themselves harder questions. Am I staying because I feel connected, or because I am used to it? Am I holding on because it is real, or because it is comfortable? These questions did not come all at once. They built up slowly, then became unavoidable. And once they started answering them honestly, everything began to shift. They realized some people only belonged to a previous version of them, a version that ignored intuition, tolerated imbalance, and stayed longer than necessary in situations that had already expired. But they were no longer that version. They were changing, evolving, becoming more aware of what their heart actually needed. And the more they changed, the less sense certain bonds made. This is what your presence awakened in them. Not confusion, but clarity. Not chaos, but courage. Quiet courage. The kind that does not shout. The kind that simply says, I cannot keep pretending anymore. The kind that accepts, this no longer feels aligned, even if it hurts to admit it. Stay with this, because this realization was not a single moment. It was a series of silent truths that slowly became impossible to ignore. And that often makes a decision even more solid. Because when a person has spent enough time thinking, feeling, comparing, and still arrives at the same inner truth, that truth stops feeling optional. It becomes unavoidable. The question slowly changes. It is no longer, Should I notice this? It turns into something heavier, something more honest. How long can I keep ignoring what I already know deep down? And once a person reaches that state, action is not far behind. The weight of pretending starts feeling heavier than the weight of being honest. There may not have been a big argument, no dramatic betrayal, no clear scene that others could point to and explain. But what happened was quieter than that, and deeper than that. Clarity arrived, steady, quiet clarity, the kind that does not shout, but still changes everything from within. They started to realize the connection they were holding on to no longer matched who they were becoming. It no longer aligned with the standard rising inside them. And even with doubt, guilt or sadness present, the truth could not be unseen anymore. So a decision was made, a difficult one, a silent one, a necessary one. They let someone go, not out of anger, not out of chaos, but because truth finally became heavier than comfort. And strangely, what followed was not instant happiness, but relief, a calm release inside, the kind that comes when inner tension finally loosens. Stay with this because this part matters more than it looks. That relief was important. It showed them the decision was not impulsive, it was aligned, it was built from understanding, not reaction. And once that inner space opened, emotional space, mental space, even spiritual space, their thoughts started drifting toward you even more clearly, not in confusion, but in recognition. Because when noise is removed, what is real becomes louder, and your presence, your energy, your consistency began standing out in a sharper way inside their awareness. Remember this clearly. The person they stepped away from was never the real center of this unfolding story. The real center was awakening, the shift inside them. The moment your authenticity forced them to see what they had been tolerating in silence. After that ending, something changed in their inner world. It became quieter, but also clearer. The external noise faded, and with it old distractions lost their grip. In that silence, understanding started rising. They began noticing how often fear had shaped their decisions. Fear of change, fear of loss, fear of making the wrong choice, fear of stepping into the unknown even when the current situation no longer felt right. But once those fears were seen clearly, they started losing control, because fear only survives when it is not questioned, and truth does not leave space for illusions for long. And this is where your impact became even more visible in their mind. What they saw in you was not perfection, but something deeper and more stable, inner alignment, a quiet consistency where words, actions, and energy did not conflict with each other. That left a strong impression on them, because it reflected something they had been missing in their own world. It reminded them of what real connection feels like. It showed them what emotional honesty looks like when it is not forced, and without you trying, without you chasing, without you changing anything about yourself. You became a reflection, a mirror that did not lie, a mirror that showed them the difference between what is real and what is only convenient. Stay with this because it goes deeper. Your presence did not push them. It revealed them. It revealed what they wanted but had stopped expecting. It revealed what they had been compromising with for too long. And once a person sees that level of contrast, they cannot fully unsee it. As time passed, they stopped asking only why did this happen, and started asking what do I do with what I now see. That question marks a shift, because awareness alone does not transform anything. It is what a person does with awareness that changes their path. So slowly they started changing how they responded to life. Old habits felt less convincing. Old excuses sounded weaker. Old patterns did not fit the same way anymore. And little by little, they became more honest with themselves than they had been before. They started recognizing how often comfort was mistaken for peace, and how often familiarity was mistaken for love, and how often fear quietly disguises itself as logic, making excuses sound reasonable, and doubts feel like facts. And once they finally saw that clearly, there was no way to unsee it again. You need to understand this part. What they discovered about you did not just create admiration, It created awareness. It woke something up inside them that had been asleep for a long time. It made them realize how often they had been settling in ways they never even gave a name to, settling for inconsistency that looked normal, settling for emotional effort that came in pieces instead of wholeness, settling for connections that appeared stable on the outside but felt strangely empty when they were alone with their thoughts. And now that their vision had changed, they could not simply return to the old way of seeing things. This is where real change starts. Not in imagination, not in fantasy, not in hope alone, but in clear inner sight, in truth that becomes louder than comfort. In the moment a person finally decides they cannot keep ignoring what their heart has been trying to say. So each passing day, every quiet moment, every reflection in silence kept bringing them back to the same realization. You did not enter their awareness just to be another passing thought. You entered to shift something inside them. And whether they were ready for it or not, that shift was happening. They also started to understand that your impact was not based on appearance, timing, or surface attraction alone. It was rooted in what your presence represented, something real, something steady, something emotionally aligned in a way they were not used to experiencing. And the more they thought about you, the more they understood that they were not only reacting to who you are, but also to what you awakened within them. You brought them back to their own depth, their own values, their own forgotten need for honesty that does not change shape depending on circumstances. And that is why the realization hit so strongly. It was not new information being added. It was old truth being remembered. And once something like that is remembered at that level, it does not fade away easily. Stay with this, because it goes deeper. From that point they started seeing their entire life differently. Their habits, their choices, their emotional boundaries, even the direction they were heading in. It became clear that staying attached to anything misaligned would only slow down their own growth. That understanding did not make everything easy. Growth never comes without discomfort. There were days of peace, days of doubt, and days where memories of what ended still carried weight. But underneath all those shifting emotions, something steady remained. They had changed. Not slightly, not temporarily, but in a deeper way. The version of them that once ignored warning signs, accepted emotional distance, and confused repetition with connection, was no longer leading their decisions the same way. A more aware version was taking shape, one that questions more, one that feels deeper, one that refuses to stay where truth feels absent. If you are still following this, understand this clearly. Sometimes a person does not leave one connection because another person demands it. They leave because truth finally gives them the strength to admit what they were already feeling but avoiding. That is the real turning point. And once that point is crossed, there is no easy return to the old mindset. Now they stand in a different mental space. Confusion does not control them the way it once did. Emotional noise has reduced. Illusions that once felt convincing now feel weak and easy to see through. Old excuses do not carry the same weight anymore. They understand more clearly that real connection cannot be built on convenience alone. Trust cannot survive on routine without depth. And emotional alignment is not something optional. It is something essential for anything that is meant to last. And slowly, without forcing it, their entire understanding of relationships, choices, and emotional truth has started to mature. Not perfectly, not instantly, but steadily, step by step, thought by thought. And somewhere in all of that inner change, your presence remains as a reference point. Not as confusion, but as clarity. Not as attachment, but as awareness. A reminder of what felt real. A reminder of what they can no longer ignore. And that is why this story is not ending where it started. It is still unfolding in silence, in awareness, and in the decisions they are slowly learning to make from a place of truth instead of fear. And as these truths grow stronger inside them, the meaning of what they discovered about you also becomes clearer. They now realize your authenticity was never just a small detail or a passing impression. It was the turning point. It was the moment the old layers of their life started to loosen and fall away. The moment they began to understand that every ending creates space, and every honest decision opens a door to something more real. This is why they cannot simply act like nothing happened. Something did happen. Something real, something deep, something that quietly reshaped their inner world in ways they did not expect. You showed them, without forcing anything, that genuine people still exist, that consistency is still possible, that values are not just words to be spoken, but ways of living that can actually be seen. And once a person experiences that kind of reminder, their understanding of love, loyalty and future starts to rise to a different level. They stop chasing what only fills empty time. They start longing for what actually nourishes the heart. Stay with this, because this is the space they are in now, between what has ended and what is still forming, between release and arrival, a quiet in-between, where everything feels different, but nothing is fully visible yet. And if you have felt this shift around you, do not ignore it. Trust it. Some changes happen silently long before they show any external sign. Some of the most important decisions are made in complete quiet, long before anyone else even knows a choice is forming. And the deeper truth here is not only about what they discovered in you, it is also about what your presence helped them remember within themselves. They remembered that they were never meant to live half-aware. They remembered that peace is not optional when the heart is asking for something deeper. They remembered that underneath everything, they have always known when something felt off, even if they delayed acting on it. And they remembered that their heart was never asking for perfection. It was asking for honesty. That single realization shifted everything inside them. Keep listening, because this part matters. Now when they look back, they can see how every small detail, every quiet observation, every emotional contrast was guiding them toward this moment. Not toward illusion, not toward fantasy, but toward a more grounded and honest way of living. A life where truth is chosen over comfort. A life where patterns that no longer align are no longer tolerated. A life where inner clarity is finally trusted instead of ignored. And yes, part of that clarity carries your presence within it. Not as confusion, but as awakening. You became a living example that depth still exists in a world that often stays on the surface. You became a reminder that a person can be gentle and strong at the same time, calm yet powerful, simple yet unforgettable, without trying to prove anything. That kind of presence does not disappear easily. It stays in memory. It influences thought. It quietly shifts perspective. So if you have ever wondered whether your truth reached them, understand this clearly. It did, more than you realize. And what it awakened inside them is still unfolding, still expanding, still shaping decisions they are only beginning to understand. Because sometimes the biggest impact one person has on another is not a promise, not a label, not a dramatic ending or beginning. It is the truth their presence reveals without effort. And once that truth is felt deeply, nothing about the person receiving it remains exactly the same again.